Safety Rep Conference, focusing on Section 58. Section 58 is one of the most important sections of the OHS Act. It has a lot of your powers in it, and it's critical that you use those powers to ensure that your workplace is as safe and as healthy as it can be. Today we've got two guest speakers who are going to take you through Section 58 and give you their expert opinion upon it. First of all, we're going to hear from Renata Mussolino, and second of all, we're going to hear from Clayton Larkin. I do have to say we did have Brooke from WorkSafe who had arranged to give this presentation, but unfortunately she's fallen ill and Clayton has stepped in at essentially the last minute. We sorted it out on Friday, so we thank Clayton for that. But it's going to be a great session. I'd like to start by introducing Renata Mussolino, who probably is the one woman who needs no introduction in health and safety circles. She's been with Trades Hall for over 18 years. She runs Ask Renata, she runs Safety Net, and she's also put together that excellent website, www.ohsreps.org.au. So Renata's here to take you through Section 58.
Hi everyone. Okay, so I'm going to start with what might sound like a really stupid question, and that is, what is a health and safety rep? Now, it might sound like a stupid question, it might sound like a dumb question, but in fact there seems to be a lot of confusion out there, particularly on the part of employers, as to what a health and safety rep is and what your role is. So here are the basics. You're elected by designated workgroup members. And note, the Act says the members of the DWG may determine how an election is to be conducted. If they do not reach an agreement within a reasonable time, they may ask the authority to either should also have no role in running the election for health and safety reps, unless the members of the DWG request the employer to do so. The HSR does not represent management. For example, it's not the health and safety rep's role to carry out the instructions of management. The HSR is not answerable to management. Has no legal duties as a health and safety rep, just the same legal duties as any other employee as per Section 25. So a health and safety rep can't be blamed for missing something, or be required by management to write a policy, for example, or police compliance, or provide training. So why does the health and safety rep, what does the Act give health and safety rep powers? Now, the powers that the Act gives reps were basically the same under the 1985 Act. And it put worker involvement through their elected reps front and centre, and is articulated in the objects and principles. So the objects of the Act: to provide for the involvement of employees, employers and organisations representing those persons in the formulation and implementation of health and safety and welfare standards. So it's about involvement, and it's not just involvement of the workers and their employers, but of the organisations that represent them. And it's about involvement both at the policy level and at the workplace level. And the principles: employees are entitled and should be encouraged to be represented in relation to health and safety issues. And this is facilitated and can really only happen through DWGs and elected reps. Now, they should be encouraged by whom? Well, clearly by the employer, although we know that doesn't always happen, and also by WorkSafe. So health and safety reps' powers and rights mean that the health and safety rep can be proactive. Employers should be, but often are not, proactive. They can identify hazards and risks by inspecting the workplace, to be consulted about controls put in place, to have input before changes are implemented, to minimise the introduction of new hazards, to take issues to the employer for resolution, and to take action if the employer fails to respond. So in my view, the role of the rep is to be that finger that pokes the employer in the arm, to make the employer address hazards which put workers and others at risks, specifically pointing at where the Act or the regs might be contravened. Workplaces with health and safety reps are more aware of health and safety and the law. Why? Because your role is to participate and be consulted, to take identified issues and potential contraventions to the employer, and to follow up if the employer doesn't react in a way that you believe addresses that issue. So where do the powers of health and safety reps come from? Well, we know that they come from various parts of the Act. Now, I know today's theme is Section 58, but in fact there are different parts of the Act that actually give reps powers. Consultation, Section 35. The powers, Section 58. The ability to represent people in other DWGs in certain circumstances, Section 59. PINs, Section 60 to 66. Obligations to train health and safety reps, Section 67. Other obligations of employers to reps, Section 69. Health and safety committees, Section 72. Resolution of issues, Section 73. Cease work, 74. Inspectors, 102. And then, of course, the regulations which spell out how reps are to be involved and issue resolution procedures and the right to request a review of controls. And certain regs have specific rights, like under the asbestos, the rep has the right to have the register. So what does 58 specifically do? Here are the powers that are found under Section 58. Note that 58 specifies why reps are given these powers, and this is really important. So reps are given the power to inspect, to accompany an inspector, requiring the establishment of a committee, being present at an interview with DWG members, with their consent of course, seeking the assistance of any person. And why? In order to represent DWG members, in order to monitor the employer's measures that the employer is taking, the measures to control, eliminate risks, to inquire into health and safety risks, and to attempt to resolve health and safety issues. So these are very pointed, they're very specific rights. Inspections. Probably one of the best known and most used powers by reps. It's very broad because it allows a rep to inspect at any time after reasonable notice and immediately in the event of an incident or a situation involving an immediate risk to any person. And it really is anywhere where a member of the DWG may work. So it's not physically limited to one specific area in the workplace. What's reasonable notice? Well, it's a bit, how long is a piece of string? In some workplaces, it might be a day. In other workplaces, it might be longer. I did have someone write in the other day telling me that they'd put in a week's notification to the employer and the employer had denied that and said, no, he had to give a month's notice. Well, I don't think that's reasonable. I always recommend establishing a regular time and pattern. So once a week, Thursday afternoon, it's pretty quiet, that's when I'm going to do my inspection. It's very important because it's not just about identifying issues, but it also allows the rep to actually talk to designated workgroup members, to look at some of the physical hazards, but also talk to people about what some of those other psychosocial hazards might be. We've got tools, you've got stuff in your show bags, and clearly there's the website. So use the tools that we've got for you, adapt them, use them, make your inspections worthwhile. The other thing too is that make sure that your employer notifies you and go and tell your employer you're requesting this when there is an incident or where there is an immediate risk to health and safety. Because unless you're physically there, you might not know that something has collapsed or that there's been a spill. You've got the right to be there, but unfortunately there's no corresponding duty on the employer to inform you of that. So make sure they know that you want to know. Committees. Committees can be, a terrible thing. Do not allow committees. Committees are worthwhile because they can do the broad workplace stuff. They can look at policies, they can look at things like how to hire consultants, or they can look at, the training requirements. There are minimum requirements in the Act. There have to be at least half have to be employees. Where possible, they should be health and safety reps. But just make sure that you don't get sucked into a vortex where the committee has to go through everything, every little thing. Your role as health and safety rep in your designated work group is primary. So you don't have to take an issue to the committee to have it resolved. If the employer wants you to do that, just refuse. They're the pitfalls. Okay, being present at interviews. That's a bit of a hard one too. You can't just be there. Your DWG member has to, A, know that you've got the right to be there, and B, know that they've got the right to ask you to be there if they want you to be there. So what is your role? Your role, I guess, is to be a little bit a checking person. If the employer wants to interview the DWG member about an incident, you want to make sure that it's not because they're being blamed for it. You want to make sure that the real issues are looked at, like have they been trained? Is there a problem with the procedures? Has the machine been properly maintained? Your role is to make sure that you're there to look at what the health and safety, what the causes are, so that it's not blamed on an individual. You're there to make sure that your members' rights are looked after. You've also got the right to be present at an interview with an inspector, so just remember that too. Seeking the assistance of any person. Now, this is something that a lot of reps have a query about, and it's something that a lot of employers possibly aren't very happy with. Remember that you're not expected to be an expert. You've taken on this role either because you were pushed into it. Hands up any of those who were pushed into the role. Oh, no one. Fantastic. Or because you're passionate about it, but you're not an expert. You know what the job is, you know the members of your designated work group, you know how things are done, and you've probably got a good idea about how things should be done. But you might need extra help. You might need someone with a bit of expertise, a bit of technical knowledge. So you can seek the assistance of anyone. It could be a member of your union, it could be an ARIO, and the employer has to let people in to assist you, but they can refuse if they think that that person hasn't got adequate knowledge. So ARIOs are accepted by WorkSafe as having sufficient knowledge in health and safety. You can also seek the assistance of another health and safety rep in the workplace. You can also ring an inspector. You could also organise for a consultant to come in, but just beware because someone has to pay that person. Remember that under section 23 of the Act, the employer, or 22, the employer has a duty to seek advice from people with expertise. So that might be something to negotiate. Okay, inspectors. Now, as I said before, the inspectors have to take all reasonable steps to notify health and safety reps that they're there, because as health and safety reps, you've got the right to be there with them. Why is that important? Because you want to make sure that they see what you want them to see. If they're looking into an issue, whether it's because it's a PIN that's being challenged by your employer or because there's been an incident, you want to make sure that they actually see what you want them to see and hear from the people you want them to hear from. So taking reasonable steps means it gives you the chance to be there. There's a fabulous book that we had we put a lot of effort into ensuring that it remained fabulous from a previous version. It's how inspectors deal with specific issues. You can download it from the website, from the WorkSafe website. There's a link also from my website. So it's really important. I'm going to let Clayton talk a bit more about the inspector's role because he's an inspector, but it's just very important to know that that's your right. Too many times, for some reason or other, an inspector comes and goes and the rep isn't aware of it. That should never happen. Okay, duty to consult. Big one. We did that last year, the year before. It's a super important thing. Recently, the Act was revised so that we've now got sections 35 and 36 together. So it's all under section 35, which means involvement of health and safety reps. We know it's not complied with very often, but we're hoping now that by doing this, it'll be much clearer when a rep issues a PIN that the inspector can actually follow up, because it is Section 35 now, and it does have a penalty on it. The consequences of reps not being involved in consultation, not being consulted, we know what they are. I recently had a query, I think just the other day, where a kitchen in a school had been totally renovated, the kitchen classrooms. And when they went back in, they found that the PowerPoints were insufficient, they were in the wrong place, and they were having to use power boards on the benches where the kids were working with water, with other things. Unbelievable, still happens all the time. Okay, so this is a slide, and these will go on the website, so don't worry about writing it down. But this really sets out some of the other things, where things come from. So helping out with other DWGs is Section 59, taking further action on breaches is PINs, attending regular training is Section 67. That's really, really important because you're trained, and because hopefully you're trained by your union or trades hall, you probably know a lot more about the Act than many of your employers, and that's a good thing. Representing members of DWGs on health and safety issues is Section 73, and taking immediate action is Section 74. So there's a bit more there. They're the other things. As I said, that there are many parts of the Act that relate directly to powers and rights of health and safety reps, and it is a bit of a problem that not all of these are directly reflected in the duties of employers to make sure that this happens. So know what your powers are, go to the employer, say, under this section, I've got this right. Facilities, for example, time off to exercise your powers and functions, and so on. So all of these are really important. And then finally here is the protection from discrimination, Section 76. We know what the Act is supposed to protect, but there's only really been one major case that was a successful prosecution. So the more you can get done through negotiation and agreement by convincing your employer that by taking this action, you will have a safer workplace, people's health will be protected, you will be better off, they will be better off, the better, because Section 76, unfortunately, is there, but it's very hard for WorkSafe to prosecute under. We had Section 78A to E, which gave civil protections, but unfortunately that didn't really happen. Okay, so drawing the strands together. Section 58 is specifically powers of health and safety reps. Problem, not all powers are in that section, and not all the powers are reflected in obligations. There are also some obligations that are not clearly reflected in OHS powers. So you've got to know a number of sections of the Act. And also that other sections give health and safety reps rights and powers too, which don't seem to be in a powers section. So taking all these powers, rights and obligations together increases the ability of health and safety reps to effectively represent the DWG members and to get things done. So that's your role. How things fit together, that's another slide there that you'll be able to look at in a lot more detail. So super reps. You're all going to be super reps. You are super reps. You know what your rights are. You understand your role. You know your DWG. You listen and you consult. You communicate. You're responsive when someone comes with you. You're aware of what's going on. You're proactive. You're poking the employer. You're persistent. You're thorough and you're prepared. However, you're realistic. You understand the limitations of your role. You don't have a magic wand. You can't actually fix things. You can't also, beyond a certain point, ensure that the employer is doing what they're supposed to be doing. You know the limitations of your union. We're there to help you. We're there to assist you. We can't actually, for instance, get a report from an inspector. You're the only one that can do that. And also the limitations of the law. And that is that the law is interpreted. Sometimes it's clear to us that the employer should be prosecuted, but for various reasons it doesn't happen. And you can see the big picture. One thing I did have, which I think seems to have disappeared, or it might be later, and that is inspectors have their limitations too. They're individuals, they're people, they might not get things right, they might not get the whole picture of everything. So just understand that once things get beyond you and your employer, if they go out to WorkSafe, things could not go the way that you want. So here's a little picture. We just wanted to let you know that if you wanted to discuss improving health and safety, our door is always open. How many times have you heard that from the employer, and how many times has that door not been open or been slammed shut in your face when you in fact bring an issue? Okay, so make sure that your designated work group is also realistic about what your role is, and it's here. Not everything can be fixed, at least not immediately. You don't have a magic wand, and neither does the union. Try to establish a good, reasonable relationship with management. Try to reach agreement through negotiation. If you can do that, you're like 10 steps ahead. Don't be afraid to use your powers. Seek assistance and advice if you need to, but they're your powers. All right? And remember that WorkSafe inspectors have their limitations. So if you issue a PIN and the employer doesn't comply, well then, it's going to be important to make sure the inspector sees your side of it, but the inspector may not agree. Okay, so remember, be proactive, be representative. Health and safety is union business. Use our website, be active on our Facebook pages. And that's it. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Renata. I'd just like to make a couple of follow-up comments following on from Renata's presentation. Firstly, in your show bags, you would have received one of these. These are our Section 58 notebooks, and they've been designed to help you exercise your Section 58 powers. So when you flick it open, you'll see there's a small page, a page that tells you how to use the notebook, and then there's the 100 sheets that you can use when you're exercising Section 58. We've tried to break it down so that any time you're dealing with an issue, you can take some notes, but you can also record the outcomes. So this is something that I spoke about a couple of years back when we held the conference on consultation. If you're in a meeting about something, it's critical that you put down what are the agreed action items from that meeting. What are the outcomes going to be? If you conduct an inspection and during that inspection the employer decides they're going to do X, Y, Z, write it down. In particular, write down when they say they're going to do something, right? Because that's what you've got to hold them to account on. Sometimes they don't always do what we want, and in that case you've got the power to issue a PIN, direct at work cease, or start the issue resolution procedure. So that form will help you exercise your Section 58 powers when you're back in your workplace. Secondly, I just want to say, WorkSafe don't always get it right. And Clayton's going to come up here and talk you through how WorkSafe handle things. But I do just want to say that you have a right under the Act to appeal an inspector's decision to internal review. And where internal review, if you don't agree with that, you have the right to go to VCAT. Currently, over 90% of appeals to VCAT and to internal review come from the employers, right? So when they have a problem with WorkSafe decision making, they have no hesitation in asking the questions that the Act allows them to ask. So we should not have that hesitation either, right? If you're concerned about a WorkSafe decision, speak to your union, get a second opinion, right? And if that second opinion is, I think we've got grounds to challenge, then you have the right to do that if you so choose. Also, just before we get on to Clayton, I just want to reiterate, we've got heaps of questions piling through. We're going to have a fair bit of time for questions in this session. 0429 117 085 is the number to text it to. Bendigo, we've got some questions from Wodonga and Churchill, but we're looking at you to get some questions in as well. We've had a question about the trench video. Someone's asking, can I get a copy of the trench video? It is up on our Facebook page. We are Union OHS Reps. It's also up on our industrial manslaughter page, but we'll also make sure it gets up on Renata's website, so you'll be able to go to any of those places to access that video if you so choose. It's now my privilege to be able to introduce Clayton Larkin, who's currently an inspector at WorkSafe. Clayton was a HSR at the craft factory for many, many years. So he was an elected HSR in his workplace for many years. He then got a job at the National Union of Workers, which was his union, and he was working there doing health and safety and organising. Following that, Clayton ended up at WorkSafe initially as an REO HSR support officer, and about 5 years ago he became a WorkSafe inspector. Many of you have probably dealt with Clayton out in the field and in his time as an REO HSR officer. It's also worth mentioning Clayton was the first ever WorkSafe HSR of the Year. He won that back in, I think it was 2001, when he was at Craft as an HSR. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Clayton up to speak.
All right, thanks Paul, and good morning everyone. Look, before we get started, just want to thank all the health and safety reps, and look, the role that you perform, and myself, I'm a HSR and a union delegate at WorkSafe, and the role that we all perform is something that does make a difference in workplaces, and when we go out to sites we see the difference that gets made every day. So just to start off today, what I want to go through, on our website there's a HSR policy position that's been in place since 2006. Now, I'll read through it just sort of verbatim, and it just sort of frames the discussions, what we're going to discuss today. So it starts off, the purpose of this paper is to articulate the policy positions that underpin WorkSafe's activity with and relating to health and safety representatives. So the first part of it is the OH&S Act 2004 recognises the important role HSRs play in representing the health and safety interests of employees. Health and safety reps have been an important feature of the OH&S in Victoria since 1985, and is widely acknowledged that HSRs make a real difference in having OH&S issues addressed and can help achieve better health and safety outcomes. WorkSafe believes the role of HSR should be encouraged, supported and protected. WorkSafe believes there should be more HSRs, and that the establishment of designated work groups and the election of HSRs should be encouraged. Now, WorkSafe will administer the OH&S Act 2004 in a manner that best advances the Act's objectives, Section 2 as Renata spoke about, and the principles of health and safety protection, Section 4, which Renata also touched on. Specifically providing policy and or legal advice to WorkSafe inspectors and other staff on issues concerning the interpretation and or the application of the OH&S Act, including issues concerning HSRs. WorkSafe will seek to adopt the interpretation that best advances the OH&S Act's objectives, Section 2, and the principles of the of health and safety protection. Now, the next section is consultation. The experience and knowledge of The experience and knowledge of employees can make a significant contribution to identifying and controlling hazards and risks, and developing preventative measures to address health and safety issues that arise at the workplace. To advance the OH&S Act 2004 requires the employers to consult with employees. The Act also provides for the establishment of designated work groups and the election of health and safety reps. While the Act gives employers some flexibility in how they consult, WorkSafe believes where employees have elected an HSR to represent them on health and safety issues, the most effective way to consult with those employees is with the assistance of and through that HSR. The next section is inspector visits. When an inspector attends a workplace, the inspector must take reasonable steps to notify the elected HSR and allow the HSR to be involved in the inspection. The inspector will ask for and see the employee elected HSR list. The inspector will ensure the time he or she spends with the HSR is reasonable, having regard to all the circumstances, including the amount of time spent with management. Inspectors may ask to see a list of HSRs and confirm that it is displayed and made readily available to employees in accordance with the OH&S Act. We as in WorkSafe expect inspectors to support the role of elected HSRs and encourage employers to engage constructively and proactively with HSRs. The next section is on protection of HSRs. Section 76 prohibits an employer from dismissing an employee, discriminating against an employee, or treating an employee less favourably because that employee is or has been an HSR. WorkSafe will investigate promptly and thoroughly allegations or complaints of discrimination against an HSR arising out of that HSR is carrying out their role in respect to health and safety issues. So, in a nutshell, is the overriding policy position. It's been in place since 2006, and you can download that if you want to have a read through it from the WorkSafe website. So, just with sort of leading up today and sort of the short notice, Paul sent me through a bunch of questions or talking points. I'll just talk through them and go through them, and I'll try and be as quick as I can so it allows more time for questions. So 58.1b, accompanying an inspector. So out of the book that, or the guidance material that Renata put up on the website, the verbatim section out of that is, inspectors will generally focus their inspection activity on matters relevant to the purpose of their entry to the place. That means what we're looking at. Inspectors will advise relevant HSRs of their powers under Section 58 of the Act to accompany the inspector during the inspection and be present at any interview between an inspector and any member of the DWG if that person consents to the HSR being present. Now, the first one is the legal limits to this, or what's the legal limits to the power? Basically, the HSRs have that right. It's in the Act, it's covered in the Act, but there is a limit on sort of relating to the designated work group. But as Renata raised, in under 59, there are other ways that you can go outside, work outside of your designated work group if requested. Now, what to expect from an inspector? So when we turn up on site, there's it becomes sort of pretty formal, particularly for a first visit. We obtain sort of the name, the details of the workplace, the person's ABN, so all the information. Understand what area of the workplace is affected by the inspection. Thing we do is inquire into the health and safety rep or the representative arrangements on site, and where there are HSRs on site, we'll ask to check the HSR list so we can understand the issue that we're talking about relates to that DWG and what the DWGs are. One of the things that we do when we check through that, if we find that it's not up to date, we issue notices to get that up to date. Then there was engage with the HSR as the elected representative of the DWG and the employer representative. Now, discussions, depending on the issues that we're dealing with, discussions may be held separately or together. It just sort of depends what we're dealing with. You can imagine that a lot of us, we deal with a number of issues in a number of workplaces. So myself as a generalist inspector, we deal with basically everything bar mines and construction. So anything that's any other place that's a workplace, we're in there, whether it's a farm, a cafe, large manufacturing site, hospital, aged care facility, so anything that's a workplace. So it is varied, the issues that we deal with. Well, now, with the list of HSRs, and this is one that I just want to sort of go through under section 71, that there is a requirement for that to be up to date. The number of times that we go out to sites and find that it's not up to date, whether there's changes and management haven't kept it up to date, we just go there and make sure that it's up to date. So the people who work in the workplace, who are represented by these people, need to know who they are and who they need to speak to. Now, how we work when we're on site, so the stuff that we do, so we'll review any applicable documentation, we'll inspect the workplace, speak to the relevant parties, and we seek advice as well. So as an inspector, that some of us have strong points in different areas, and a lot of it, and one of the things that we have discussions, particularly with the new inspectors, you've got to know what you don't know. And if you don't know, don't pretend you know it, get advice. So the next point that Paul's put up is what an inspector looks for when assessing physical risks. So when we're dealing with physical risks, reported incidents, so we'll have a look at what incidents are there, what information and instructions being provided, particularly with plant, we'll look at danger areas, some in warehousing, traffic management where there's mobile plant, machinery with guarding, hazardous manual handling, licensing. One of the things that we check regularly on site, and what we look for is that people have the appropriate licences or the certification for doing the task. Training and supervision. Supervision's a big one, and myself, I've issued a number of notices on employers for lack of supervision, and particularly when I hear an employer banging on about people not wearing the appropriate PPE, or people not doing this or people not doing that. So when it comes down to sort of blaming the work or blaming the people in the workplace, my view is that there's an obligation for them to supervise, so they'll generally get a notice for lack of supervision, and they can get their supervision up to scratch. Now, psychological health. What we look for when we deal with risks to psychological health, that there's systems in place, that they've got all the processes and policies to deal with it. So they've got the systems in place to actually deal with issues with psychological health or mental health issues. And also incidents. We'll have a look at the incidents and what incidents are there and what reported incidents. But it is it's a complex area. I've done a bit of a stint myself in the, we call our psychosocial unit, where we deal with bullying and those sort of issues. And it is very complex. It's a difficult area to work in and to sort of navigate your way through it. But going back onto the question that was raised before the break on mental health, just a bit of an understanding, and as a delegate in the safety rep for the inspectorate, our members aren't immune to it either. So our members have issues with mental health and the risks associated with it as well. Right. How to work with the inspector and give them information to make a decision. Look, I think the best thing to do is, particularly for health and safety groups, I like to hear from the health and safety groups and the people on the floor or who are actually doing the task to understand what the task actually is. A lot of times when we talk to employers, and particularly with the bigger companies, when we talk to managers, that their view of what the job actually is, or what their view of the job is and what the job actually is very different. So being able to just explain in a nutshell what the job is, what the issues are and what the risks are. And for us making a decision, that's the most important thing that we need. We need to understand firstly what the risks are, and for inspectors that, as Paul said, we've got internal review, so you can go to internal review, but also internally we've got what we call sort of quality assurance. So all of our inspector notices and entry reports all get reviewed sort of on a periodic basis, and that's some things they look at, that if we've made a decision that we've actually identified what the risk is, and we've got the points of proof to say that that's a risk. That's how we've come to form a decision or form our opinion to issue a notice or not issue a notice. All right, the next section. When a inspector interviews a DWG member about an issue relating to OH&S, the legal limits of the powers, as I said before, that it's within your DWG and where the person consents. What to expect when an inspector conducts an issue or an interview? We basically do it just to gather information, to get an understanding, and what a lot of it is the questions that we ask, and inspectors ask questions in a particular way, just so we can get an understanding for our, like I said before, our points of proof. We need to have the actual point of proof to be able to say that, yeah, that's what we've based our belief on, and that's what the notice is issued on. Also dealing with the facts, and one of the things that is that as a health and safety rep coming into these interviews, you're a representative. You're there to represent the person, not as a support person. I know over the years, going into different workplaces, yeah, people say, oh, you're coming in as a support person, so you can sit there and you don't say anything, you're just there to support the person. No, you're there as a representative. So you have the right to represent that person and raise the issues. But also within that is just basically dealing with the facts, depersonalising it, which you want to look at how you can sort of influence and have good engagement, is taking the personalities out of it and dealing with the issue, and just sort of get into the nitty-gritty of what the root cause is and what sort of the causation factors of why this is happening, so the appropriate notices can be issued and the issue can be dealt with. Now, interviews about risk to psychological health. I've done a few of these with health and safety reps involved. They are hard interviews to do, and particularly how the people are impacted on it. It's also been there for the person that you're representing to support them and being there for them, but also being able to sort of depersonalise it as well and sort of move the personality and say, look, this is what the issue is around the psychological health or the mental health issues. So, in conclusion, the top tips for getting the most out of a visit from a WorkSafe inspector. As I said from the outset in our policy position, inspectors are expected to support HSRs. We encourage or expected to encourage employers to engage constructively and proactively with HSRs. Things I'll say is be yourself, deal with the issues, and don't get caught up in the nitty-gritty. Sort of just deal with the issue as the issue, and what's in the best, and do it sort of based on, and even over the years being HSR, would I sort of have a look at and do a bit of a sort of a pulse check on is what's in the best interest of the people that I represent. I might have a particular view on something, but is that in the best interest of the people who have elected myself to represent them? And as I said before, you're a representative. First and foremost, so you get to have a view, you get to have a say, and you get to actively represent someone. As I said before, and I've no doubt a number of you have heard it, you're a support person, you sit there and say nothing. No, you're a representative, you can voice your opinion. And also be realistic about what you want to resolve, and just getting it solved and basically getting the issue fixed. And as I said before, sort of depersonalising it, and the end game is making the workplace safer, and however we get to that is the most important thing. All right, so.
All right, so we're going to cut to some questions now. We've got plenty of time for questions, so keep those questions coming. We'll flick them up on the screen there. Pardon me. So the first question that's come through is my right to be present at an interview in addition to any industrial right for an employee to have a support person present? Renata, do you want to take that one first?
Well, look, the Health and Safety Act covers health and safety issues, and as an elected health and safety rep, if one of your DWG members has an issue that's health and safety related and is with the employer or with an inspector, you have the right to be there. Any other industrial right comes under maybe an EB, so that's quite separate. Where you might get a bit of pushback is if the employer says this is not a health and safety issue, it's an industrial issue, so it's really up to you to be able to argue that it is a health and safety issue. And that's, I guess, where I came in at the end of the last session, where sometimes mental health issues are pushed on as not occupational health and safety, but we know from WorkSafe that these claims are very high in terms of workers' compensation claims, so they are certainly health and safety issues.
Thank you, Renata. So the next question is, can we please have available Renata's PowerPoint slides? The answer is yes. They will be up on our website. Are you likely to get them up tomorrow, Renata, or next week?
Yeah, I think I might ask one of the boys to put it on the Facebook page as well, if we could.
Yep. Yes, we'll put it up on the Facebook page.
And we'll also put up WorkSafe's policy position to health and safety reps, because the new website is new, WorkSafe's website, and it's not so easy to find things. So perhaps you can send us the link, but I should have that linked on my page as well somewhere. Yeah.
Great, thank you. So this question is from Bendigo. If a large workplace with more than one HSR, how much notice should be given that an inspector is coming, and also how many can accompany an inspector and sit down in a meeting with management? Clayton, do you want to handle that one?
All right. So for large workplace, more than one.
So it's a large workplace, there's more than one HSR, the inspector's coming out. How many of the HSRs can go with that inspector?
Look, my view, if I'd turn up to a site, I'd expect to see all of them until I can work out what designated work group the issue's in, and if it affects all their DWGs, they can all come for a walk and go through it. But as the Act says, it's relating to the designated work group that you represent. So whatever DWG the issue relates to, generally a lot of inspectors will go with that HSR. But I think having a discussion with all the HSRs, and normally these issues sort of go across DWGs anyway, particularly a lot of the stuff we get is manual handling or machine guarding, so it may be across various DWGs.
Can I add something?
Yeah.
In the policy that Clayton referred to, it actually says inspectors must ask to see the list of elected HSRs. Now, I suspect that this question's been asked because we know that some employers will HSR shop. And I've had cases through the years where health and safety rep has been the one to raise the issue and only finds out sometime later that an inspector has come out over the issue and they weren't notified. Now, if the inspector is told by the employer, here's Joe Blow, he's the health and safety rep, speak to him. And in fact, Joe Blow may be a health and safety rep, but he actually wasn't the one who raised the issue. So I think it's really important that if a health and safety rep raises an issue, if it goes to a PIN or if there's been a service request generated, that health and safety rep lets everyone know that this is what's happened. That way, if an inspector comes into the workplace and that rep isn't there, everyone else can say, oh, nice to see you, Mr. Inspector or Ms. Inspector. But in fact, the rep who raised this issue is on a day off today, and it's really important that you also speak to that rep as well as to the rest of us. Inspectors don't have magic ball, or what are they called? Crystal balls. They should be asking about the list of health and safety reps. But if they don't, you can be poking the inspectors. Magic crystal balls.
Thank you.
Oops.
So the next question is a good one.
Can I just jump on?
Yep.
One of the other discussions, we had this discussion on a site. A couple of our inspectors went out and dealt with an issue and was told the health and safety rep wasn't available. So it went through, the inspectors dealt with what they had to deal with, and they came up again, and I went out and had a discussion particularly around Section 76 at this site for the treatment of the HSR, and particularly that they weren't involved in the previous inspection because they were told that they weren't on site. And we had a discussion with the employer under Section 125 about intentionally say what that is offences in relation to inspections and intentionally hindering or obstructing an inspector or intentionally concealing from the inspector the existence of any other person. This particular company had some fairly high-end lawyers from Sydney flew down and they quickly did a backflip on everything that was going on and were very apologetic. But that's one of the things that we have used to sort of ram it home.
The rep was
on site,
but the employer said he wasn't available because he was busy working.
Yeah, but they said he wasn't on site. So we viewed it as, we had a discussion with them about concealing the existence of that person or intentionally preventing or attempting to prevent another person from assisting an inspector, which is or hindering or obstructing an inspector.
Yeah, and I guess the little lesson out of that too is this: if you've raised an issue and you find out later that the inspector has come and gone, well, you should be getting a copy of the entry report. So if you haven't got that, ring WorkSafe and say, I understand an inspector came out, blah, 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 I want the entry report. Then contact the inspector and say, I wasn't aware that you were here. I was either off shift or they didn't tell me, and I would like to speak to you about this issue. And I'd bet that in 100% of cases the inspector would accommodate that because that's what should have happened in the first place.
Righto, so our next question is from Churchill. Can health and safety reps ask inspectors in regional areas to come to a workplace to give advice?
Yeah, you can.
You can, right.
Well, look, it'll depend on with our group leader and just sort of getting us released. Because look, what the primary function of our roles as inspectors is regulating the Act. We can go out and give advice. We don't mind having chats to groups of HSRs, but with employers coming out and wanting us to seek advice, we'll do it to a point, but they've got the means to hire consultants and that sort of stuff. But if it's in relation to HSRs, yeah, we can go out and give advice, and quite often that we do speak to groups of HSRs and sort of point them in a direction or different ways of dealing with issues.
Don't forget, though, that under certain circumstances, inspectors are required to attend the workplace, and that's under Section 65. So if there's been a dispute about a cease work, for example, if a PIN has been challenged, or if an issue can't be resolved within a reasonable time, well then you need to contact WorkSafe, and an inspector is required to attend. Also when there's disputes about designated work groups, for example. So there are some certain circumstances where an inspector is required to go out, but that's really to investigate where something has deadlocked. Yeah.
All right, next question. Can the HSR request that management not be present when an inspector is interviewing a member of their DWG? So if an inspector's come out to interview someone in the DWG and management's asking to be in the room, can the HSR kick him out?
Well, the inspector normally would.
But if the inspector doesn't...
Yeah, the HSR can request that he interviews them alone.
And I think you could relate that back to the section that you quoted before, where you're obstructing. Because the reality is, we know, if you've got your boss standing over you, you may be limited in what, or you may feel limited in what you can say, specifically if you're a member of the DWG, not the HSR. And you want to try and be as honest as possible. And with the boss over your shoulder, that might be difficult to do. Yeah,
and I think it's a bit of an understanding. Quite a few of us inspectors are aware of it as the power imbalance that is what it is within workplaces. So with that you'd want to talk to, and if you want to get the right information from the person, you'd want to speak to them on their own.
I don't have a copy with me, otherwise I'd look it up, but that booklet I put up, How Inspectors Deal with Workplace Issues, have a good look at that, because we really tried to tease out not just what the Act says, but how the inspector would be acting, how they would be reacting, how they would be conducting themselves in order to try and ensure that what is in the Act is in fact what happens in the workplace. And sometimes it's not cut and dried, but that booklet tries to expand on, well, what can you expect an inspector to do if they're going out to support health and safety reps? So.
Next question is from Wodonga. With natural attrition taking place in the workplace, should HSRs be replaced as soon as is practicable, or as the company suggests, wait until the 3-year term is expired? Renata.
Look, I think that it's not really up to the company. So it's really up to the health and safety reps and the designated work group members to sit down when there's been a change in circumstances at the workplace. And this could be either an increase in membership or workers, change in the physical locations, or when numbers go down. So if you're in touch, as health and safety reps, be in touch with your DWG members, talk to them, see what you think is best, and then any party can then seek to renegotiate DWGs, and 3 years is really the maximum period of time. So if a rep feels that their DWG has more or less disappeared and feels that there's no point in them remaining the rep for 3 people, but in fact the DWG should be combined with another one, that's something that they can initiate negotiation and discussion with the employer. It's a funny question because I often get the other way, that the employer's the one that's trying to force reps out of their position and employer's the one that's trying to amalgamate DWGs. And the answer is really the same. It has to be done by negotiation and agreement. It can't be forced by one party or the other.
And the short answer is that if a HSR has moved on to another job, that DWG should not be left without a HSR. They should immediately elect another one. You shouldn't be waiting 2 years till the old HSR's term expires. You elect a new one immediately if the old one leaves.
Yeah. Look, just on this, and this is one that I've dealt with, I deal with quite often. Look, when it comes back to, if the position's vacant, if the DWG wants to re-elect someone in it, they just re-elect someone in it, irrelevant of what the employer's view is. It's a worker's DWG. It's your DWG, you decide what they, or how whether you want to be represented or not. Now, one of the discussions that I do have quite often with employers, particularly around DWG negotiations, HSR elections, is The employer's role in that is to negotiate the DWG. Once it's negotiated and it's been agreed to, that's where it ends. The rest of it's dealt with by the designated work group. And if the members of the designated work group choose to leave the position vacant, that's their choice. If they want to fill it, it's their choice. So the conversation over with employers, that their role in this is to facilitate the ability for a group of workers to be represented. Whether that group of workers want to be represented or not is up to them. But that position stays there. If it's not filled, it's just a vacant position for that DWG.
All right, thank you. So after Renata and before Clayton and I started lobbing hand grenades, we've had a question about that. So here the question is, a PIN notice was issued to our employer. After investigation, WorkSafe cancelled the PIN. Employer has now defaulted to original behaviour. What do we do now? So firstly, I think under section 128, you have the right to question that cancellation of the PIN via internal review. So if you get on WorkSafe's website, you'll be able to get, there's a form you can fill in which will trigger that internal review process, which is effectively what they call a desktop review. There's an officer at WorkSafe who will ring you up, chat to you, ask for more documents, and they'll go through the process of double checking why the inspector came to the decision they came to. Before you do that, I would advise speaking to your union. If you've got one, it's always a good idea to run this stuff past the union. You have 14 days to do that. So there is a time limit on it. You have 14 days to lodge an internal review application. So if the PIN got cancelled 6 months ago, then it might be worthwhile thinking about issuing a new, slightly revised PIN on the issue to force the matter to be addressed again.
And make sure that you actually have a really good case. So if it was dismissed last time, work out, well, why did the inspector dismiss it? Is it that he didn't talk or she didn't talk to the right people? Is it that you didn't have enough evidence there? Is it that, and unfortunately, this is what I said before with inspectors having their limitations. Part of the problem is that they don't have as much time at their disposal as they want. Part of the problem may be that they speak to the rep and then they speak to the employer, and of course they'll get a different story. And then in my view, what they should do is go back to the rep and say, well, hang on, you said A, B, C, but I've spoken to the employer and he says X, Y, Z. The inspector should in fact give the rep the right to respond to the employer's position, to say, well, yes, he said X, Y, Z, but here's the evidence. It's not X, Y, Z, it's actually A, B, C. So make sure that you, if you're going to reissue a PIN on a slightly different, have more information. Maybe make sure that you've included stuff that you didn't include before, but don't just leave it.
Thank you very much. So the next question is around inspections. So the question is, does an HSR have to give notice to an employer to inspect their own DWG?
Yes. Reasonable notice. But this is why, and of course remember, a law is like, that's the minimum. You can get better. So when I talk to reps, I always recommend that they have 2 meetings when they go back to the workplace. Once with the employer and once with their DWG. And at that meeting, go through what their role is, what their rights are, what their powers are, what their expectations are, and reach some agreement. So if you can reach agreement with your employer that you will regularly do an inspection of your DWG every Tuesday morning at 10 o'clock, you don't have to notify every time because you've got that agreement. It's where you go outside that you have to actually notify them within a reasonable time. Of course, if there's an incident or a dangerous occurrence, you don't have to notify. You've got the right to go immediately. So even if the boss doesn't notify you, and I have said, make sure that you tell them they have to notify you, but one of your members says, oh God, quick, come here, this has happened, you go. You don't need to notify in that circumstance.
So the next question is a good one as well. It's how does one deal with doing inspections outside one's working hours in terms of payment? So what I understand this question to be is I might be rostered from 8 till 2, and then I do my inspection after 2, how do I get paid for that?
Well, this is a real life example, isn't it? Okay, so the Act, if I could, I would rewrite bits of the Act to make it absolutely clear. The Act actually says that the employer has to give health and safety reps time off with pay to undertake their role and exercise their powers. Now, time off with pay implies that you are at work and therefore you get time off to do that. But it also, the underlying principle of the Act is that as a health and safety rep, you've taken on this role voluntarily. You've got rights and powers, you can do certain things, your role is really clear. If you do things outside of your time, and we've got this very clearly explained in the employee representation handbook, like attend a course out of your normal hours, that is to be treated as time at work. Now, WorkSafe has forever, since 1985, considered that if a rep does things outside their normal time, and it's probably because they're being nice to the employer, like, I'm not going to stop working, I'll do it when I finish, that should be considered time at work. Now, in reality, there's always going to be a bit of give and take. A rep will probably spend more time doing, being a rep than what they get paid for. But you shouldn't be expected to do all the stuff that you have the right to do in your own time. Would you agree with that?
Yep. It should be treated as time worked, and as Renata said, it should be during working hours, and it give HSRs the time to do that. Yep.
A really good document to use in this circumstance is the WorkSafe's Guide to Employee Representation. In that document around this question, it says that where an HSR is exercising their powers, they are taken to be on paid time. So my advice to you is to drag that out and stick it under your employer's nose if this question comes up in your workplace. All right, we've got time for maybe one, maybe two more questions, and I thought this one was a good one. So is it the responsibility of the HSR to conduct OHS inductions of new staff and complete the paperwork for this induction?
No, 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 no.
Is that clear enough?
HSRs have no responsibilities, absolutely none. Section 58(3). Nothing in this Act or the regulations imposes or is to be taken to impose a function or duty on a health and safety rep in that capacity. Now, an employer may say, oh, Mary, you're the health and safety rep. Would you like to come to the induction and explain to the new workers what your role is? Mary should say, yes, I'd love that. Thanks, boss. But if the boss says, Mary, you have to do the induction and I want the paperwork, Mary says, no, sorry, that's not my role. Get your 2IC to do it.
Yeah. It is, this has been a long-term frustration of mine, because quite often that we see it at workplaces, or we sort of hear from HSRs that have been told because of the HSR, they've got to handle the MSDSs, and that's part of their role. It's not. As Renata said, 58(3) is clear. Unless all the employees are required to do it, you can't be just taking that you have to do X because you're the HSR. Your role is, or fundamentally what you do as an HSR, is to represent people and represent your designated work group.
All right, thank you. Well, it's 11:59 and I'm just conscious that I'm between you guys and lunch. So I'd like you to thank Renata and Clayton for coming here to share their experience with you today. So it's just clicked over to midday. Lunch will be served now outside and at each of the regional venues, and we'll see you back in each of the areas for your HSR panel. Thank you.